How did you meet James Booker?
Oh, I don't remember. I remember the first time I heard him play. It must have been about 1968 or 69 at I think the Jerusalem Temple, was it? It was an old synagogue or something on Dryad Street. I think I may have gone up to him after that performance. He and Fess played, and I don't remember who else. Maybe Eddie Bow. I remember telling him how much I liked his performance. That was probably the first time I said hello to him, but I don't remember when I first had a conversation with him. It would have been probably not until the mid-70s that I really got to know him, 75 or 76.
Did you just meet him at a gig, or?
I think so. A friend of mine, Mike Smith, I think, knew him and some other people that I was hanging out with, who eventually became the core of the group that founded Tipitina's, were aware of him and introduced me to his music as a real artifact, and I was certainly captivated by it.
And you got to know him, and you started talking to him and got to know him?
Yeah, he would take people up, and you would find yourself on his A list, and then you would find yourself being ignored, and you would be grateful and sad at the same time. He would turn up at your door in a taxi and expect you to pay the fare, and then he'd come in and spend a day chatting with you, and then he would disappear, and you wouldn't have any close contact with him again for a few months, and then all of a sudden he'd be on your doorstep. And he was a terribly lonely person, I think. Probably the loneliest person I've ever known. I don't know that he had any real friends. He would go home alone and would be alone all the time, I think, except when he was performing. I guess he turned up at other people's houses the way he turned up at mine. If his isolation got too much, he would appear somewhere, and then he would disappear. He didn't like feeling committed to people, I think. I don't think he felt comfortable having any kind of social demands made upon him, or he didn't want to put himself in the position of being anybody's good friend. He didn't want that responsibility. But he needed people. He was so lonely.
Did he call you up on the phone, and did you?
Oh yeah.
Call you up like 12 times in a row? And...
Yeah, he'd call up and talk about nothing. He wouldn't ever have anything on his mind except sociability and breaking the silence around him, I guess. But he was as likely to appear as he was to telephone.
What else was he like besides a lonely person?
Very gentle and very hard-edged, full of contradictions, paradoxes. You never quite knew when he was telling you the truth. It never seemed malicious to me. It never seemed as though he was making fun of me. It seemed as though he was more making fun of himself or of the idea of absolute truth or whatever. His sense of irony was prickly, and it would keep you guessing as to whether to take him seriously about anything. You had the feeling always, I think, that he was really a dear person, and you wished that you could get through to him. It was very easy to love James, I think, and I think many of us did. When he died, there was just an incredible outpouring of love for him. Quite a number of musicians gathered at my house on Her Street for a memorial jam, and he would have it would have touched him deeply to see the people who turned out for that. It was quite amazing, and it was very, very heartfelt. I remember Deacon John that evening just suddenly all by himself singing a Closer Walk with Thee. And those of you who know Deke know that he's ironic himself, not a sentimental person. But we were all very, very moved, and it was something about James that made you love him.
When was the last time you had seen him before he passed?
A couple of days. It was ironic. The same thing happened when Fess died. I had seen him just the night before. It was so... I wasn't sure whether a message was being sent to me or what. I went to hear James at the Maple Leaf, and he asked me if I had his new record, and I said, of course, James, I got it as soon as it came out. And he said, well, I'd like to give you another one. And he hauled one out and autographed it and gave it to me, and I was so touched. It was so special somehow. I've never opened that record. But I wouldn't have guessed that he was going to die so soon, but I think we all had a sense that he was headed that way. He was just gradually doing himself in. Don't know whether he ever ate anything really. He would go to steak and eggs in various places with a bunch of us or with one or two of us, and was never hungry really. His system was pretty shot, and we all feared the worst, but were still pretty stunned when it came.
How did he die?
His body just gave out. I mean, I think it was liver and heart and one thing or another. There were specific things, specific medical causes, but he was just exhausted. His spirit was exhausted, and he was ready to go, I think.
Well, it seems like he had a lot of spirit.
Oh, yeah.
What was it like to see him perform?
It was always different, and it was always different from 5 minutes to the next. His moods were so variable. You never knew where he was going to take a song. You never knew where he was going to take a conversation. You never knew where he was going to take himself. It was maybe like watching a drunken butterfly or something. It was part of the genius of his music, I think, that it came out of him without much conscious filtering. It was very difficult, I know, for anybody to play with him. It was a standing joke in the musical community, of course, that playing with James was like chasing an ocean wave or something, or a breaking wave. It was he was so unpredictable, and I think that was the genius of his improvisation. There were no formulas, no set sonata form, statement, development, and recapitulation. You never knew where you were going to be, or what other songs were going to be incorporated into whatever he had begun to play. So the evenings that I remember best, and I used to see him twice a week for years, the evenings I remember best would have involved the Maple Leaf music room adjacent to the bar, being filled with people just sitting there with their mouths open, not talking, just listening. And it was like church. It was an amazing experience to see one man and his sense of beauty and his imagination captivate so many people. It was you were watching art being created, and I've grown up listening to a great deal of improvised jazz. I grew up in and around New York City, and from an early age was pretty broken into hearing some of the great people improvise jazz, both traditional jazz and so-called modern jazz. But I've never seen anything like the Booker man, who, I must have heard him play certain songs like Sunny Side of the Street 1,000 times. And there would be something brand new every time. Something to keep you on your toes, to keep you coming back week after week after week. I'm sure he never had a song list or anything. But it wasn't just that he would play whatever popped into his head. It was that the songs that he did repeat, either because he loved them or because other people loved them, and he was asked to repeat them every time. They were always new. It was astonishing. His conversation was very much like his playing. Very difficult to track, and often very illogical, but fascinating. He was so bright, and I'm afraid he was so unbalanced, as the world judges these things, that there was no discernible pattern. You just went with it. And
what do you mean by unbalanced?
Well, I'm trying to avoid saying that James was crazy, but I think I'm trying to avoid saying that because I think it sells him so short. But of course he was flat insane. My layman's diagnosis would have nailed him with just about every kind of dementia known to man. I think he was probably certifiably manic depressive, way up and way down, and certain of his behaviors were certainly schizophrenic. But you hate to attribute his genius to that kind of thing, just as El Greco's astigmatism is not the whole story of his art either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the incredible energy and diffuse imagination, I think, is an aspect of his mental state. The cork would come out of the bottle, and the champagne would flow, and it was amazing.
He was a smart guy?
Brilliant, I would say. Yeah. He was. I think we all pretty much agreed that he was a genius, whatever that means. He absorbed ideas, information in a very non-linear way, in a very unuseful way. He probably was a very poor student in college and in high school and stuff, although he was so bright that he may have been passed along with good grades. I don't know. But his brain was not geared to the retention of orderly information, or to the orderly retention of information, I should say.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Did did you like seeing him more play solo or playing with a band, or?
Oh, I much preferred seeing him play solo. Much preferred. When he played with other musicians, there tended to be mind games going on with him. He wasn't malicious about it, I don't think. Maybe every now and then, if somebody was sitting in who struck him as being a little pompous or a little full of himself, James would take him down a peg by constantly changing rhythms or patterns or something. But I think with the best heart in the world, playing with people that he admired, like Singleton and Vodakovich and Red Tyler and so on, he was just too much by himself. And they were wonderful about keeping up with him, and of course they're brilliant musicians themselves. But I didn't like the sense that anybody was trying to figure out what was coming next. And if you were playing with him, I'm sure that was the situation you were in. You didn't want to mess him up, so you would try to anticipate something, and it made everybody tense, I think. I'd be interested in talking to those guys about this. I don't think I ever have. I don't remember. But I liked his playing by himself when he could start and stop and idle and go 1,000 RPM and whatever without anybody else sort of panting to keep up. Then I could relax and just listen. You know.
How would you describe his music?
I would describe his music, I suppose, as being characterized, I'm an English teacher, by metaphysical wit. This is the way you describe John Donne. Tons of things going on simultaneously. Many layers. Many levels of feeling, I think, going on at the same time. James had an incredible capacity to generate beauty. Even in the midst of his worst chaos, he would strike chords that could bring tears to your eyes. But he had a capacity to make dissonance work, and the interplay of harmony and dissonance in his music was never just for effect. Somehow, it was what was in him. I've seen so many excellent musicians who knew how to work one thing off against another, knew how to generate an effect by playing hard against soft or whatever, and would tend to think their way into that kind of contrast and so on. But it was simply it was the genius of James that was what he felt, and that was therefore what he played. I mean, as I said earlier, this was the way he carried on a conversation, which made it sometimes very spacey, very surrealistic to talk to him, because he spoke the way he played. his music was incredibly beautiful. You see, he was not afraid in playing of sentiment, I think. As a person dealing with other people away from music, I think he was terribly afraid of sentiment and of letting his feelings come through. But he could break your heart playing. He could make you cry. And you would have the feeling that he was crying maybe himself as he played sometimes. I mean, he was so alone, so separate.
He was also, from what other people told me, he was a very private person.
Oh, yeah. I was... one of the great honors of my life, I guess, was being a pallbearer for him. But I wouldn't presume to say that was anything that my friendship with him had entitled me to. It wasn't an honor I had earned. I never felt that I knew him, really. I just loved him and admired him, and was grateful to know him. And so my carrying him after he died, helping to carry him, was just an expression of my feeling for him. It wasn't that I felt that I knew him.
Did you have a favorite tune that he did?
Anything
in particular?
Well, Lead Me On, I guess. But that was something that he only played for me, and he played it only maybe half a dozen times. I was sorry when James died that I had not pressed him about a project that he and I had discussed a number of times. I had asked him about our cooperating on an album of gospel music. We were both ministers' sons, and we both loved gospel, and he never played it as part of his regular stuff. When my mother died, my parents belonged to basically an African-American church in New Jersey, and I have always associated Lead Me On with my mother's funeral in that church, and I had asked James to play that song for me a number of times. And so I suppose that was the most special song. The Sunny Side of the Street, I think, is probably my favorite of his regulars. Junko Partner scared me to death, you know. Everybody who sings that song tears it up. John Mooney, Dr. John. I've never heard a version of it I didn't think was amazing. And of course, Booker's was the most amazing version of Junko Partner I've ever heard. There were lots of amazing songs.
Did you ever meet his family? Ever meet his aunts?
Only his aunt, whose name just went straight out of my head. I met her a number of times. Oh. I was thinking about her earlier today. I can't think of it.
What was she like?
Oh, very sweet. Very sweet. She had helped raise James over on the coast. He was sent over to Mississippi as a boy. And she and her sister had helped take care of him over there.
Did he ever talk to you about his growing up when he was a kid and things like that?
Yeah, obliquely. I wish I could remember more. I've wished for years. I've wished ever since James died that I had the brains to jot some things down on paper that he passed along. I should have known better, because I think we all understood while he was alive that he was going to be a permanently important person, and it would have been smart to record some of those things. Yeah, he did every now and then let something slip. I don't really remember, though. I know that he found himself at such an early age playing with grown-ups on Bourbon Street and elsewhere, places not very wholesome, that he felt he had to keep his guard up as a child. He was, 13 or 14, I guess, probably. And I think he was on Bourbon Street by the time he was 15. So certainly things of that kind would have shaped his whole persona, his whole way of dealing with other people.
Did he ever talk to you about his time when he was living in New York City?
Oh, he certainly alluded to it, but I truly don't remember. That's it's too bad.
Or did he ever tell you about his time? It doesn't sound like he would have, but did he ever tell you about his time he was in Angola?
No, I don't think so.
Why do you think he wasn't, in a way, more popular or quote-unquote successful outside of New Orleans?
I don't know why he wasn't more popular in New Orleans. He just kept shooting himself in the foot. I remember one time he was scheduled to go off to the San Francisco Blues Festival with a whole contingent of New Orleans people. And he got to the airport and bailed out, just came back. I think, it seems to me he called me to pick him up. Just refused to go. I think fame for him held the same terrors that friendship did. If he got to be famous, then demands were going to be made. And I think he was already, when I got to know him, running out of gas and feeling unable to meet demands. I got to know him best after his European tours. I got to know him some before that, but not nearly as well as I knew him later. And by the time I was around him a good deal, he didn't want to leave New Orleans. He didn't really want to take on anything that was going to stretch him or oblige him to conform. He could get away with murder playing his gigs at the Maple Leaf and at the Toulouse Theater, which came along a bit later. For a while he was playing a regular gig at Jimmy's. And he could show up or not show up or whatever, and he would still have a job the next week. And he liked it that way. He would, as I'm sure everybody has heard, sometimes play a song or two and get up and leave and not return. And the piano would sit there silently, and we would sit there silently, and then we'd leave too. You never quite knew And in the last half dozen years of his life, I think that was just the way he wanted it. So if he'd gotten big-time record contracts and big-time concert tours and things, in his strangely Puritan way, he would have felt obliged to be something other than he wanted to be. He wanted, a clock puncher or something. Of course, he came from a generation before the rock star phenomenon, when it became fashionable, for Sly or various people just not to show up for concerts. He cut things off to keep his life as simple and uncomplicated as possible. It's a great shame. And of course, we all wonder what we could have done to make him happier and keep him alive. He was such a burden. He was such a difficult friend to have.
He was rather reticent to travel outside of New Orleans, right?
Well, he hadn't been always, but by the last 6 years or so of his life, he was just wanting to be here. Yeah, he had jobs offered to him all over the place, which he would either flat turn down to begin with, or he would cancel them. Yeah, that San Francisco fiasco, I think, was the biggest of the deals. I think he was going with the Nevilles and Dr. John. I don't remember who all was involved in that, but the idea was to really put him on track as a national figure. He was by then really quite well known in Europe, but not in this country. He had been in the shadow of Fats and Alan Toussaint and all kinds of people here. He was primed to break out, primed to go big. Man, he just couldn't handle it, didn't want to.
This is actually a kind of difficult question to ask. Was Booker gay?
I would think that in his heart he was gay, but I never. This is so sad. I don't know why he never connected with anybody. One time, he used to go sailing with me a lot. And one time, I'd picked him up and we were driving out to the lake. And I asked him if I should have invited person X along. And he said, "Well, why do you ask that?" And I said, "Well, I thought maybe you had a crush on this guy. I thought maybe you had some feeling for him and were having something with him." And he said, "Oh, wouldn't that be great?" And he said it sincerely, straightforwardly. He said, "Oh," he said, "that would be wonderful." But he said, "No, I'm not having anything with him." And I said, "Well, the next time we go sailing, would you like me to invite this guy?" And he said, no. He said, "No, I don't want you to." So that was the only time it ever came up. I never saw him in any kind of intimate relationship with another human being, male or female. I'm quite sure that he was gay, but as unhappily as anybody could be. I mean, it was just another facet of his separation, I think, of his being an outsider. Too bad.
So he occasionally would refer to, wanting to see men or something like that.
Not to me. I don't remember anything like that. I don't know. The conversation I described is the only time I remember the subject coming up, and I brought it up. And I think he did have a crush on this person, but he was not having a relationship with him and didn't want to. That was the thing.
Okay. The other kind of difficult question to ask people is, Booker was, freely admitted that he did drugs and drank a lot. Did you ever see this happening with him? Did you ever know him to,
Not hard drugs, no. Just reefer and alcohol. No, I think he certainly knew what a Puritan I am in terms of hard drugs. So I think he, whatever business he had in that area, he kept to himself when I was around. I should also say that I did see him take Valium. He was addicted to, I think, just about everything you could be addicted to, and I have that from him. I mean, he didn't make any bones about that. He mocked himself about being an alcoholic junkie, and acknowledged. He told me that kicking Valium, which he was trying to do at one point, was the hardest addiction to deal with that he had confronted. But I don't actually remember ever seeing him even snort coke. So it would have just been reefer, and of course he drank an awful lot.
Did these affect the way he, consumed substances? How did that affect his personality?
Oh, I think it was terrible. I think, and yet it was, you never were quite sure where the craziness left off, and and a chemical factor came in. The booze and whatever drugs he was doing certainly stimulated all the craziness, I'm sure. You just felt as though you were dealing with somebody whose heart was broken. That was kind of it. And his heart was broken before I knew him.
Booker ever tell you how he lost his eye?
Yes, he never told me directly that I can remember. Maybe he did. But I was with him. The correct version or not, I've heard about his being stabbed in the eye with a fork or something in prison. I've heard about it happening in New York. Actually, there was also, I remember, some version of it happening in Philadelphia. What was he doing in Philadelphia? He lived in Philadelphia for a brief while, I think. I don't quite recall what that was, but what was he doing there?
Actually, I remember hearing about that. He lived, I think he was playing in something like a Holiday Inn somewhere.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
He, I think, was, and I've only read this. No one's ever mentioned this to me, but I think what he was doing was he was living outside of Philadelphia, playing like cocktail music in a Holiday Inn for like a year in the 60s when I think he was trying to stay off drugs. I think that's when I seemed to.
I think that's right. Yeah. Now, do you not have the name of his aunt? Because I have this somewhere. I just can't think of it.
The name of his aunt, yeah, because eventually I'm going to get a hold of her.
Actually, the story that I was going to tell, I don't know why I was so reticent about it. It was the first time I met her was when several of us got James out of jail for impersonating an officer. It was late after a night at the Maple Leaf when he had seriously gone off the deep end, and several of us had tried to calm him down and get him squared away, but he took off again and went to Steak and Eggs dressed as a cop and was arrested for impersonating an officer, which was one of life's supreme ironies.
Tell me the story about you and he sailing on Lake Pontchartrain.
Oh, oh, dear James. He had probably never even been in a rowboat in his life. I had a good-sized sailboat with a steering wheel, and you stepped down into it so that James, who was not a swimmer, felt safe. He was very reluctant the first time to go sailing because he was afraid of the water and was afraid he'd fall in. And I said, James, this boat will take care of you, and everyone on board will take care of you, and God will take care of you, and not to worry. So he came, and he loved it. And one day, a whole bunch of us were out, and James was at the wheel of this 35-foot sailboat, and we were just tin-canning along, crashing through the waves. And I think the only moment I ever saw James purely, profoundly happy was that moment when he looked over at me, and he called me Thorney, which is the New Orleans dialect, like Earl for my name. He looked over at me and said, Thorney, I'm jamming with the wind. I'm jamming with the wind. And he was just like a little boy. He was just lit up. And he was just so excited. And I said, James, you're playing this boat like a grand piano. Oh. There was just so much beauty in that man. A deaf person, I think, watching him play the piano, would have been moved to tears. His hands were so beautiful. His fingers were elegant, long and elegant. And I used to sit there where I could watch his hands, and I'd just be transfixed for hours. It was so amazing. He had a great deal of beauty in his soul. And I'm just terribly sad that we let him get away from us. We should have taken better care of him somehow.